So let's take a look at a tweet. So this is a tweet from a journalist at the Washington Post by the name of Taylor Lorenz. She says, I wrote about how the Depp-Heard trial offered a glimpse into our future media ecosystem, where content creators serve as the personalities breaking news to an increasing number of viewers, and in turn, define the online narrative around major events. So we can see overall what the premise of this article is from the tweet. Although yesterday we did point out in this very space that a number of tweets are used as kind of faux headlines that don't really match the substance of the article. I can tell you that this particular tweet does match the substance of the article in this instance. So we can use that as our jumping off point to discuss things. Before we do, as I mentioned before, I do want to point out that this is the publication, the Washington Post, that published the Amber Heard op-ed in 2018 that has now been found defamatory by a Virginia court. Interestingly enough, the Washington Post does not appear to be willing to take down that article. Instead, they posted an editor's note that I'm getting through the New York Post. I did confirm this myself, but it just wasn't displaying properly in this space. That says, editor's note. Oh, that's not right at all. Editor's note, June 2nd, 2022. In 2019, Johnny Depp sued Amber Heard for defamation arising out of this 2018 op-ed. I think we all know that. On June 1st, 2022, following a trial in Fairfax County, Virginia, Circuit Court, a jury found Heard liable on 3 counts for the following statements, which Depp claimed were false and defamatory. And we know the statements. It's the headline, it's the 2 years ago, and it's the Vantage Point statement. The jury separately found that Depp, through his lawyer Adam Waldman, defamed Heard in 1 of 3 counts in her countersuit. That's the note that is now on top of the Washington Post article. And the Washington Post has good lawyers, and so they know what they're doing. However, I can't help but look at this and say, if this online publication is intended to stay up, this note doesn't really take the defamatory sting out of the defamation that Johnny Depp experiences, at least according to 7 Virginians in a jury deliberation room, by this article being read by other folks. So at some point, the question becomes, when does this in and of itself constitute republication? Online is weird. The internet is weird. The law doesn't necessarily keep up with advancements in technology. But you do have a journalistic outlet here in the Washington Post that is, at bare minimum, putting its stake in the ground. We are not going to take this article down. If you read this note very carefully, you get, well, Johnny Depp claimed these were false and defamatory. The Washington Post, this journalistic outlet, this beacon of democracy dies in darkness, isn't actually taking the jury's verdict as seriously as one might hope they would in this kind of context. They're effectively going to force Johnny Depp to go get an injunction to take this down, so should he so choose, because they're not otherwise going to do it for him, and they're going to imply that it was Depp that claimed they were false and defamatory, and that there wasn't actually a jury verdict that found liability here. Because yes, they found Heard liable for the defamatory statements, and I think the Washington Post is probably hanging its hat on the fact that that doesn't mean that Washington Post knew it was false when Amber Heard made those statements. But Washington Post now knows that a jury has found them to be false and is nevertheless continuing to publish it online in a kind of continuous defamation. Now, I don't know the precedent in Virginia on online defamation and what kind of continuity you can have there, but I would imagine that if this stays up in this format, there would be potentially a case to at least get an injunction through the Amber Heard trial, but also to potentially drag the Washington Post in and say, what are you doing? Because if you're continuing to publish this particular article, just flagging that you know a jury found it to be false doesn't change the falsity of what you are publishing out to the world through your publication. So I wanted to flag this for you just to give you the flavor of what the Washington Post is actually doing, because we've got potentially 2 headlines here to talk about in this space in Hangouts and Headlines. And it goes in the direction you would expect from a publication that is saying these things. So that's the Washington Post. Now we can look at what Taylor Lorenz has said, and we can look at exactly why some people are taking offense to that very article. Let's just make sure I can pull it up properly. So who won the Depp-Heard trial? content creators that went all in. Now, that's not wrong. As a matter of fact, we've talked on stream with Legal Bites where we were doing coverage of the trial. And we said, hey, look, obviously our channels have grown. There have been a lot of interest in our coverage of these particular issues. But this article kind of goes in a different direction. This article talks about why that might be a problem, right? And Taylor Lorenz actually says something differently. We will highlight her tweet to me talking about what the purpose of this article is in just a bit after we look through it ourselves. But what I see here, just as kind of a prelude, a spoiler alert, if you will, is an article that is designed around protectionist qualities, designed around saying, well, the Washington Post has standards. The Washington Post is a legacy media outlet. The Washington Post is a better place to get your information. And yet people are getting their information from elsewhere and kind of lightly trying to dive in to why that might be. Influencers discovered there's money and clout to be made in covering breaking news. Now, Taylor Lorenz, as I understand it, is effectively the Washington Post's internet person. She's supposed to have the best handle on things. She is online. She does, quote unquote, internet culture here up at the top. And so money and clout isn't really a terribly unusual way of stating things in the internet space, clout being effectively followers and subscribers and reputation and things along those lines. But in the context of writing it in a major publication, it takes on a more negative tone, in my opinion. Right. So when we look at this, I think we should probably hold Taylor Lorenz to a little bit of a higher standard for people that aren't going to be internet culture aficionados, because this looks very much already in just the subheadline. And hey, since we watched the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial, maybe she didn't even write these, but maybe then the Washington Post has to be held to that standard. That when we talk about this implies certain amounts of negativity before you even get into the article. Here we have a picture of Johnny Depp, and now we continue. When the verdict came down in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial Wednesday afternoon, thousands of online influencers scrambled to respond. Twitch streamers reacted to the news in real time. YouTubers posted analysis videos. Instagram meme accounts joked and celebrated Depp's win. TikTokers broke down the most meaningful moments from the decision. And the videos and memes were just the latest in a tidal wave of content about the trial that dominated the internet for much of the past 2 months. So, like many of the other articles that we've read about in this space, this isn't about the trial. This isn't about the merits of the thing. We've got another Washington Post article to look at for that purpose. This is about the coverage itself. And we saw this really start about halfway through the trial, really during that break week that we had, where a lot of these media outlets started to say, whoa, Legal Bites, Emily D. Baker, all these folks are making a lot of money. They've got a lot of subscribers. A lot of people are watching them. Why is that? And analyzing that, and in some respects, kind of arguing against it sometimes. We've covered an insider article, for instance, here that maybe took a few knocks at Emily Baker and Alita at Legal Bites. And this one is of a similar ilk. You see, by talking about TikTok and internet memes and everything else, you're framing the story as if these are all goofballs that are talking about this particular trial, when there is at least an instance here that isn't that, the law tube of the world. And I wouldn't even bring it up if you just stuck to the memes and that kind of thing. However, you are going to bring up in this article, we will see it, Legal Bites in particular, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The trial offered a potential glimpse into our future media ecosystem where content creators serve as the personalities breaking news to an increasing number of viewers, and in turn, define the online narrative around major events. Those creators can also bring in major personal profits in the process. In this new landscape, every big news event becomes an opportunity to amass followers, money, and clout. And the Depp-Heard trial showed how the creator-driven news ecosystem can influence public opinion based on platform incentives. Okay, so we're almost totally fine here. We've got kind of the slanted subheading. We saw that. We've got a reference to the jokers on the internet. We saw that. And then we get a fairly neutral description of what's actually happened. You see kind of the edges about, okay, well, these influencers are going to define the online narrative from the Washington Post in this particular context. Maybe that's not a good thing, but that might be reading into things a little bit too far. And then as we continue through the paragraph, what do we get? We get the first kind of obvious slam in terms of the journalistic output, the newsworthiness, the news value, the informational value of these particular influencers, right? It's not just that, oh, these people are popular, oh, these people are making money, oh, these people are making clout. It's because they're doing it to respond to quote unquote platform incentives, to feed the bot, to talk about the algorithm, if you're here with me on YouTube. And that is very true in some important respects. You have to try to guess at what YouTube will like. You have to try to guess at what any of these particular platforms will like. And that's worthwhile to mention, but it frames this particular story before we've even got into any substance of what Taylor Lorenz might be talking about here in the Washington Post as at least a little bit negative, right? When we're talking about these things, we can see that this is set up to say, well, these people are just doing whatever the bots tell them. They're not neutral like we are. And that's going to put your kind of filter on as you read through this article. And we'll see it more specifically as we go on. This is just the first instance of it. Nearly every large breaking news event in the past year has birthed a new crop of online influencers. As the coronavirus began its deadly spread across the country, people turned to large health-focused influencers to make sense of it, often falling for dangerous misinformation. Okay, so the very first example of this phenomenon that they want to use in this article is coronavirus misinformation. And YouTube probably already flagged this video just for my saying that phrase, just to give you another notation on how platform incentives work. When Russia invaded Ukraine, here we go, YouTube, you just have fun with this paragraph. War pages proliferated, with their creators earning thousands by selling merchandise and posting OnlyFans ads. And as waves of anti-LGBTQ legislation flourished in recent months, popular LGBTQ streamers and TikTokers received major boosts in attention. And that's interesting in of itself. So you've got coronavirus misinformation, you've got the Russian war in Ukraine, and then you've got LGBTQ streamers essentially fighting anti-LGBTQ legislation. It's a very interesting paragraph here about what Ms. Lorenz is saying are the influencers that are controlling the quote-unquote online narrative. And if you look at a situation like that, if you look at somebody saying controlling the online narrative and say to yourself, well, isn't that what the Washington Post online really wants to do realistically? I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, right? What issue the mainstream media or the masthead media or the legacy media or whatever you want to call them has with these kinds of articles, this kind of coverage is, of course, they are incentivized in this space, as am I, right? Let's put all our cards on the table. Let's talk about tilt and bias. I am a member of LawTube insofar as I'm a YouTuber that talks about law. I talk about transactional law. I talk about Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. I help my friends do those streams at Legal Bites, and I'm a member of a lot of panels. So this is an issue that is close to my heart. I'm going to come at this particular article from a certain perspective that says this stuff is important, that it's important to have these conversations in a manner that allows us to have a good, maybe not neutral, but at least multifaceted discussion with each other rather than just allowing the Washington Post or whomever to control the narrative entirely. And honestly, I've talked about this before in other streams, but I think that the success of Legal Bites or Emily Baker or me even is in large part, or at least in significant part, because there are holes in the coverage that people are getting, that there's a certain lack of foundational trust in these legacy institutions that you can have honest, frank discussions with in this space on YouTube or whatever your preferred platform is to get maybe a little bit closer to the reality of a situation. And yes, we're lawyers talking about a legal question. I think that's worth noting. And unfortunately, as you will see, it doesn't get noted here. When the Depp-Heard trial began gaining traction online in April, internet users around the world recognized a fresh opportunity to seize and monetize the attention. It's negative concepts, right? They pounced on it. They said, oh my God, what a trial. Let's get in on that. And I have no doubt that a lot of them did. In fact, you can see it all over the internet. But it maybe is a little bit negative for what is, in essence, a new way to consume and to otherwise engage in content that's happening in the news. Christopher Orek, a 20-year-old content creator in Los Angeles, has posted a dozen videos about the trial to his more than 1.4 million followers on Instagram across several pages. Personally, what I've gained from it is money as well as exposure from how well the videos do, he said. And I don't know whether or not that's a quote directly to the author of this piece. We'll talk about that in just a second. You can go from being a kid in high school, and if you hop on it early, it can basically change your life, Orek said. You can use those views and likes and shares that you get from it to monetize and build your account and make more money from it, meet more people, and network. And in all honesty, that's just a business model, right? The Washington Post wants more clicks, wants to monetize and build its account, make more money from it, meet more people, and network. So in order to come at this from any kind of negative space, you have to assume that these goofballs aren't giving good information, which we'll get to. Now, the content creator Alita Majeka and earned $5,000 in 1 week by pivoting the content on her YouTube channel to nonstop trial coverage and analysis, according to Business Insider. So we're going to talk about this sentence. I got to put my tilt out there. I got to put my bias out there. Alita's a friend of mine. Obviously, those of you that are here probably already know that. Alita's a friend of mine. I go on her channel all the time. I was a panelist on her coverage of this trial, and I want to see her treatment in these articles done properly. That umbrella guy, an anonymous YouTuber whose entire channel is dedicated to pro-Depp content, earned up to $80,000 last month, according to an estimate by social analytics firm Social Blade. I will tell you that these numbers are almost always wrong. Oryx said he earned over $5,400 last month in Instagram Reels bonus payments. Now, so what has been removed here, we'll have to point out, was an issue that Alita and Legal Bytes had. So this has been revised. I don't know whether this actually has an edit mark. Let's see if it does. Nope, not up there. Let's see at the bottom here. Edited for, the story has been updated to clarify comments made during Waldman's testimony. Nope, this appears to be an unmarked edit. Thankfully, due to the nature of the internet, we can break this down a little bit more fulsomely. So we're in the paragraph with Alita Majeka and Legal Bytes, who you'll note a couple of things of in this paragraph already. Alita is a lawyer. Legal Bytes is a law channel. The panel that discussed the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard lawsuit were lawyers for the most part. She also had other specialists in different fields come on. And at no point is either Legal Bytes, as the title of the channel, referenced, or the fact that she is in fact a lawyer, right? And I would argue that that's because this paragraph and this article is designed to make you think that these are goofballs. They are people of the grandiosity of the Washington Post. Democracy dies in darkness. These aren't people that otherwise you should be listening to. These are TikTokers. They've got weird stuff that's on there. They're doing Johnny Depp runs and things. And so when we talk about this, we shouldn't mention that Alita is a lawyer or that Legal Bytes is otherwise somebody at a platform that has lawyers discussing this issue. We shouldn't do that at all. Now, Alita, thankfully, captured a little bit of this yesterday night. If we look at how the paragraph was originally written, we see exactly what we saw before, except after that Social Blade reference, we have a parenthetical statement. Majeka and that umbrella guy did not respond to requests for comment. That's interesting because according to Legal Bytes, she says, this says I didn't respond to requests to comment. I know I've gotten a lot of emails over the past 2 months, but I've just double checked for your name, Taylor Lorenz, and I see no email from you. Also, I didn't suddenly pivot. I started covering this before the trial began. I can also tell you that Alita, I'll tell this, I'll give some back office dealings here, some behind the scenes on how the sausage was made. Alita started talking about this trial and coverage of it earlier than any YouTuber, any content creator that I know has ever planned to do anything. It was months and months and months and months before the trial started that Alita flagged me and flagged others and said, this is what we're going to be covering. Pop in if you're interested. This is how I'm going to be doing it. Like, it was all planned out. She had an entire plan for it. And it's interesting, right? Because you've got this parenthetical statement that says they didn't respond for requests for comment. It no longer exists in the article that's in the Washington Post with no mention that it disappeared. In an article that is basically premised on journalistic integrity. What are we even talking about, people? What are we doing here? How does this happen? And I think the answer to it is effectively that Taylor Lorenz or the Washington Post team that made this article, I have no idea how many people had their hands in this at any given time, went and looked at the Business Insider article with Legal Bytes and just kind of took it and put it out there, right? Now, interestingly enough, that Business Insider article, which did feature, I believe, quotes from Alita, is a little bit out of date, right? You'll note a couple of things here. It mentions the name Legal Bites, implying strongly that she's a lawyer, which in fact she is. Talks about earning $5,000 in a week. I can tell you this, that's old news. This article is old enough that when you talk about 10,000 concurrent viewers and $5,000 in a week, it's not remotely up to date for where Legal Bites actually finished covering the trial, right? So you've got an article that comes out here that uses apparently Business Insider for its primary source, doesn't reach out for comment to somebody like Alita, at least as far as Alita can tell, and then has the audacity to say that they didn't respond to that request for comment. It doesn't even need analytical analysis, right? It doesn't even need me to tell you why that's possibly wrong. Instead, what we've got is a situation in which we've got completely unmarked edits, covering somebody that I know well, covering it in an out-of-date way, and without the necessary contextual information for any given viewer to evaluate it. There we go. So yes, I have a tilt on this. I have a bias on this, that this is wrongly reported. Alita is my friend, but still, if she weren't, this is the kind of thing that if you could tell happened to anybody, I would note it here in Hangouts and headlines. And that already puts things way far afield, but we still have more. When large creators saw the attention relative unknowns were receiving, many fully pivoted their content to covering the trial. Remember, that pivot is part of what Taylor Lorenz here is arguing happened with Legal Bites, when, as I said, months before the trial started, she was going to do this. And if you actually look at the weeks that the trial was covered, this $5,000, the actual coverage up to 10,000 concurrent viewers, was relatively small compared to what the big channels wound up receiving, and even the bigger channels than her at the end of the trial. So it wasn't a pivot. It wasn't a pivot as described in Business Insider, which also mentioned she was a lawyer, and she didn't get asked for comment, at least as far as I can tell, when that sentence was removed without notation in this Washington Post article. Makeup artists, meme accounts, comedians, lifestyle influencers, K-pop fans, movie reviewers, true crime podcasters, real estate influencers. Suddenly, the Depp trial was their primary focus. Also lawyers. In fact, lawyers had the biggest kind of impact on all this. You could go on any given day and see who was watching what online, and you could go right down the list of Emily Baker and Nick Rekieta and Legal Bites and the lawyer and Nate the lawyer and the various attorneys up at the top of that list. That was the biggest deal, but it doesn't match with what your premise is in this article. And that isn't to say, by the way, I take well some commentary I got on the Monica Lewinsky analysis. It said, look, Rick, a lot of people really did take in this trial with that kind of media grazing approach. They aren't watching 12-hour streams. That is totally fine. And I take that well, that more people than maybe I gave credit to were watching the trial in that way. And you found that to be a deficit of my analysis in that article. I'm willing to grant that many people did look at it in that fashion. What I'm not willing to grant is that that means that they were necessarily uninformed or taken down the primrose path where they don't get an understanding of what this trial was. I'm not willing to grant that so far. But this, all of this, when you look at it rhetorically, every paragraph now is designed to make you feel like it was goofballs and not the mighty Washington Post that was delivering this information. And that's worthy of acknowledgement, and that's worthy of analysis, even in the Washington Post, because frankly, that isn't great for them or their business model. But it's designed to make the person that wasn't following this very closely say, well, that's not right. We don't want goofballs telling people how to examine a trial. And yet the biggest and most efficient group of people that were talking about these things were lawyers. Content produced by social media influencers skewed heavily pro-Depp, with economic bias playing a big role. Johnny content performed a lot better, said Rowan Winch, a 17-year-old content creator. When people do post stuff trying to defend Amber Heard, they lose followers. A lot of major content creators probably don't even care about it that much. They just care about the views that it gets. And I think this is worth noting. I think it is worth noting that when I start covering the case on Legal Bites, that when I say bad things about the Depp case, or I say something that's pro Amber Heard and the structure that she gives, that was not received terribly warmly in the audience that I was talking to. And you can take those things into account, but not everybody will. And certainly I was more than open about how I felt about the evidence as it came in. I think that provided a better understanding for the audiences over at Legal Bites. And I think that helped grow that following, that subscribership over there, even more than it might have otherwise. I was just one small part in a much bigger machine. But I think the folks that actually were able to say, hey, look, let's analyze this as it comes into the jury were helpful in that understanding. But you do have to have a certain amount of will to look at the negative comments and to look at potentially subscriber drops and followers, et cetera, in order to do that. So I will grant Taylor Lorenz and the Washington Post this point, that the platform can't incentivize specific opinions on specific sides of issues. We see that all the time. And it is worth noting, but it isn't worth noting that everyone everywhere did this, and to throw everything under the bus, to throw all the babies out with all the bathwater. Depp's own team recognized the phenomenon in hand and looked to capitalize on it. Last month, Adam Waldman, who represented Depp against Heard's abuse allegations in 2016, testified that he had had numerous phone calls with several sympathetic YouTubers and content creators whom he called, quote unquote, internet journalists. I communicate with the internet journalists exactly the same way I'd communicate with the mainstream media. I'll inform them, he said. And I'm not entirely certain why the scare quotes are necessary around internet journalists. Internet people can definitely perform news-related activities. There isn't some kind of mighty license that you get in order to report on news items. But this is the distinction between, the mainstream press and the non-mainstream press. And the one thing that I always remind people of is when you read the First Amendment in the United States and it says you have the freedom of press, it is not some special category. It is not some magic thing that you put in the brim of your hat that says press that gives you special powers. The press is just the ability to publish what you otherwise have the freedom of speech to publish. It's not a magic designation. It's not a special class. And the Washington Post and others are learning that pretty quickly as we do see this sea change in how news is consumed. As traditional news outlets prioritize stories such as the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion on abortion, I covered that during the trial, the war in Ukraine, not going to cover that on my channel, and mass shootings in Buffalo and Texas, which we did at least comment on during the trial, it left an opening for online coverage to set the tone with the Depp-Heard trial. But notice what this sentence is doing, right? What has the article done so far? The article has said, look at all these goofballs. We're not going to mention that Alita's a lawyer. We're not even going to mention LawTube at all. Emily Baker has 600,000 subscribers, and we're not going to mention that at all. By the way, if you say Alita Majeka's name 3 times, here. How you doing, Alita?
I'm like Beetlejuice. I'll just show up.
You're like Beetlejuice, Candyman, whatever you prefer. The woman in the mirror, Bloody Mary.
Yeah.
Anything that you like. Anything that you like. Well, we were only about halfway through discussing this article, but we did talk about, I don't know if you saw this, Alita. Mm-hmm. We did talk about the fact that they made an unmarked edit in your paragraph.
Ooh, it has already been edited. Well, I saved a copy.
Oh yeah, I already put it up, and you can share it separately because I have to use incognito to bring these up. So it takes me like 4 extra button presses to move around the StreamYard. But yeah, we talked about you. I laid my biases down on the ground. I said, look, she's a friend of mine, and so this is how I feel. But they don't mention that you're a lawyer. They don't mention your channel name, which would give away that you're a lawyer.
Of course, because that would be a dead giveaway, right? To say legal bites, to say, oh, maybe it's not so much of a pivot.
Right. Well, it's not a pivot at all. I also talked to them. I did give a little sausage making away. And all I said was that it was months and months and months before the trial when you informed us exactly what your plan was in terms of coverage and how it was going to be handled. And that honestly, I think I don't want to speak for you. You would have been covering the trial throughout its entirety if it never became a popular internet thing, that you had planned to do it, period.
Right. It was, I had some friends in LawTube that kind of looked at me sideways and were like, you're crazy. You're committing to 6 weeks of this? That's nuts. What are you doing?
When I thought those thoughts, I wasn't looking at you. I was just thinking in my own room going, wow, that's a hell of a trial. So we are talking about you a little bit. We are talking about this article, and the premise that I had set forth in looking at these paragraphs is that they're trying to set up at the top here that it's all goofballs, right? They're bringing in everybody that they can think about to be goofballs, K-pop fans, lifestyle influencers, comedians, true crime podcasts, and they're only really talking about goofballs throughout this portion of the article. I do think they raise, at least a point about, the fact that Johnny content was maybe doing better than Heard content online, and the robots do like that kind of thing. But overall, the thrust of the article just doesn't work very well because you're only talking about goofballs. And then we had just gotten to this sentence, and then I'll hand it over to you for whatever you want to talk about on this before we proceed through the article. But this sentence is really the Washington Post, Taylor Lorenz, sitting there and telling you, well, we were too taken up covering real news. And I guess we ceded the ground to these goofballs on the internet because we had more important things to talk about. And so you've already kind of seen the thesis writ large in terms of argumentation in this article by the time you get to this point. And that's before I even get to the NBC journalist's tweets, which we'll definitely be talking about in the next little while. So that's what I've got right now, Alita. Thank you for coming on. If you don't recognize Alita, that is Legal Bites. That's who we've been talking about in this article.
I am she.
Yes, with the out-of-date references. It's funny. Taylor could make her point better if she had an up-to-date reference.
I mean, it's just yet another point for I didn't do my research. I didn't do my homework. Because there are ways to find those updated numbers. Plenty of other people have. They like to comment.
Well, she knows
very
what
often with derision.
She knows what Social Blade is, and I did tell folks here that those numbers are way off. But she does know what it is. I'm sure that number displays higher for you right now, as on Social Blade at least. And so it's just a wild kind of set of things. The other wild thing here is if you go to this Business Insider headline, I just put it up before you came in. It says Legal Bites. It talks about you as a lawyer. Like you have to deliberately strip this stuff in order to use this as the source. And then, yeah, once I realized that they edited out that line, I said, oh, come on now. And it's not at the bottom. So if you look at, they give their edits. They give their edits here. They do say that it's been edited for Waldman's testimony. They don't happen to mention that they said that they asked you for comment and never did.
That they got called out by 2 YouTubers.
Yeah. Yeah. Did Umbrella Guy call him out as well? Or was it just, just you and
me?
Yeah,
he did. And he took the same, the same paragraph screenshot that I did. To show the same thing, like in his tweet, he basically did the same thing that I did, and was like, "Hey, no one reached out to me." I was like, "Okay, so it's not just like it's not just that I've missed some email that has like gone to the ether." oh man,
yeah. So yeah, we were just bringing this up for you, and thankfully that you did it because
that's why I did it. I had a feeling.
I can't even. I see. This is me. This is naive Rick here. Going, well, you could at least mark that you could say it in some kind of narratively opaque way at the bottom. You know, the paragraph on Alita and Umbrella Guy was revised for clarity. You know, I mean, like you could at least mention that you made an edit. To me, you make an edit and you don't say anything. That's pretty much the height of journalistic malpractice. But yeah, so tell folks, you know, we highlighted your tweet, but tell folks what your kind of situation was with this and how you felt as you went over there.
Well, I mean, yeah, somebody had tagged me saying, "Hey, you're getting some shade in this article," and I was like, "Okay, yet another one. All right, let's take a look at what it says." And
you get that DM a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened a few times, and it's usually the same theme. It's that these YouTubers and these TikTokers are cheapening the story basically by turning this all into cheap clickbaity entertainment, right?
So the salaciousness. We're so, yeah.
Yeah,
we didn't talk about law at all.
And of course. And the fact that everyone is making these very dramatic pivots, right? That it's a sudden pivot.
Yes, you were previously an ice cream channel, and then you started covering the trial.
Of course. Yeah. Yes. My channel has primarily focused on nail painting.
Sure.
But I mean, right. Like it's really frustrating to me. Those 2 points, you know, number one, saying that they had reached out for comment and that I didn't respond, that I declined to comment was the thing. Then on top of that, saying that I pivoted. Those are the 2 things that just like were I wouldn't say that I was even like that emotionally upset until I started to have a conversation behind the scenes. And then it was like, I started getting this recharacterization of what the article is back to me from the author. And I'm like, you know, it's not quite as celebratory as you are seeming to make it seem now in this conversation directly with me. I can see that there's quite a bit of shade being thrown around based on like, basically the main theme of the article is, hey, this trial has been very profitable for these people and that's why they're doing it. Who cares about the facts? Who cares about the story? Who cares about anything other than the money? Which is absolutely ridiculous and it's nonsense. And also it ignores the fact that some of the biggest you could say influencers in this trial, the ones that were originally live streaming this stuff, is big media, right? Like this is
Yeah, they
mainstream
certainly
media.
tried. I mean, they were running their streams, weren't they?
They were with their own
just don't like to talk
commentary and
about their
everything.
stats.
Of course, but they're not making money off of it. They're definitely not profiting off of it. Only the small people are, right?
Sarcastic elite is my favorite.
And then on top of that, the commentary that they are giving is devoid of the factual landscape. Meanwhile, on my channel, on other channels, on that Umbrella Guy's channel, it's all about the facts. It's all about the facts that are finally coming to light.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think definitely the lawyers, one of the things I talked about on this is it's amazing that this article doesn't talk about Emily or Nick or you as a lawyer or any of these things that were at the top of all of what people were watching during this trial, right? Like it was the top 5, and it's not just it's Nate, it's a bunch of people that are streaming that trial, and that's realistically, at least on YouTube, if you're going to bring YouTube into this, Washington Post. That's what people were watching. So to ignore that and to frame it differently. And then I brought up the tweet that she made after she saw that I was doing this, saying it is, I can only imagine in terms of back office conversations you were having, effectively a celebration, give or take. I hope my piece illuminated why people are turning to content creators for news and why people trust influencers over traditional media. Yes. We have more article to read through, folks. This article isn't going to suddenly shift and do that. It's not about that. We're going to have some quotes about how dangerous influencers are and how the program manipulates them a little bit. We got more of that. We don't have why people trust influencers. We don't really have any of that that second sentence. I should note, by the way, that as I do, I invited her on. Everybody's always welcome. I'm always happy to get perspectives. There can be things I'm missing. I'm not an all-seeing arbiter of the truth. But we'll see if she takes me up on that. But this actual description of what this article is, I found to be, let's say, inaccurate. Let's go with inaccurate. Yeah. So I wanted to cover this as soon as I saw it happen. I really did like your tweets about this. And I know you are busy today. You don't have to stay with us for looking through the whole article or anything like that. But I wanted to make sure we got your take on all this happening and the interactions you're having with what is a pretty significant public figure herself in Taylor Lorenz.
Sorry, you want my comment on
whatever
part?
You like, honestly, Alita. No, I mean, but this is the Washington Post, who we pointed out at the top is keeping up their article and is apparently a defamatory article. And they're keeping it up with an editor's note, which I'm pretty sure doesn't work, but we'll see where that goes. And this outlet is talking about you.
It's like it's been bungled every step of the way, right? Because number one, it was bungled in the omission of important facts, right? The omission of the fact that I am an attorney, the omission of the fact that my channel is centered on legal content and always has been and always will be. And then it was also misleading with the sentence that was in that paragraph referencing a request for comment. Now, she did apologize. I will say that. I give her credit for that. So she did apologize privately. She did say that she didn't put that statement in there, that was put in, I guess, presumably by the editor. She requested that it be taken out. But if you're going to make any kind of a revision to it, you got to note the revision.
Yeah, and I didn't know any of this, folks. This is all news to me behind the scenes. So I just noted it as I'm going through because I knew I wanted to hit it, and I was like, "Wait, where is it?"
Yeah, yeah. But that's why before I make any kind of a public comment on an article, I'm always going to want to save it in some kind of PDF form because you never know what's going to happen after an author has been called out. So
yeah, well, I mean, you're in a different stratosphere on that stuff. I'm referenced, but mostly in connection with you. On these things, and you're coming up a lot. Emily's coming up a lot. There's a real, I don't know if I want to say concern, but they're certainly covering what's happening online in this particular trial a lot in a lot of these articles.
Yeah, Yeah. And there is a bit of irony saying, the mainstream media wasn't covering this because we were covering more important issues like
Right.
Ukraine and all of this other stuff. But then you look at all the headlines out there and they are covering it. So,
well, they're not going to ignore this many people interested in something, but for the most part, they're going to try to find a way to cover it from their high horse and talk about how badly everyone else is covering it. So
of course, which is the irony is that they're just looking in the mirror when they're saying that.
Well, yes. I mean, the very next line, there's a seriousness that legacy media follows when they cover these things. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, the seriousness involved in not actually looking at the facts before reporting, not using a fact-based reporting system.
Well, I think that certainly we have seen, especially in the op-ed pages of these various outlets, that they sometimes come in with their own premises and are not swayed at all by the trial court facts, the cases in chief, or even the jury verdict at this point. So, the Washington Post has planted its stake in the ground. They're not taking that article down without an injunction, and they're just going to say up front that a jury found it false. Come at us, bro. It's like, okay.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the seriousness of legacy media, right? They also make revisions without telling you. It happens.
But that is serious. That is, of course, serious business.
Yeah. But, well, content creators can lean into internet culture and can be silly and crude and crass, which is true.
Absolutely.
But it's not always the case. Now, this is actually pretty truthful, I think, in terms of usefulness. It comes across as way more authentic. Authenticity is the currency of the realm, I think, to some extent here online. And it's one of the areas where legacy media really suffers. They overproduce things. It's all contoured. That's one of the reasons headlines can exist, is we can go and look and look at the message in these things and how they're presented. And you don't have authenticity here. I'm very sorry, Miss Lorenz. You're always welcome to come on here and explain your perspective or tell me why I'm wrong. Love to have you. But that's what I see here reading these articles is, a masthead saying these people are weirdos. Don't listen to them. And also this lady named Alita, whose name you maybe can't pronounce as you read through here, is just a goofball and you shouldn't pay any attention to her.
Right. Yep.
So
exactly. And I do think I definitely agree that I think that authenticity is important these days. And I think that is one of the big reasons why the MSM is not doing so well in comparison. But I think at the same time, like, you don't even necessarily have to have like personality, authenticity. All you need is to have some sort of diligence to tie what you're saying to the facts that you can back up. And that seems to be woefully deficient these days.
Yeah, I have no problem. I've said it in this space. If you want to say I looked at the situation and I believe Amber Heard for X, Y, and Z, and you have a conversation with me, I can disagree with you. But if you're basing it on actual observation of these things, go nuts. I'm not demanding that everybody agree with me. Honestly, I still think that there could be kernels of truth in what Amber Heard had to say, but she made it impossible for the jury to find them. So I'm more than happy to have that conversation. The problem is the premise is reversed. It's here's the assumption, everyone else is wrong, and we're just going to fight on the basis of nothing. And so many of these articles that we're reading now are arguments that I can look at, I can talk to you about, and you can find and see they're hollow in the middle. Right? I mean, this is just an assumption. This is just a premise here that says these are weirdos. We're going to have another section here, which is actually what I think might have informed the creation of this article, would be my guess, which is this Cat 10 Bars Twitter thread. Did you see this yesterday?
I did. I just saw that. I think the first tweet, and I didn't look any further, but it's along the same lines from what I saw.
Yeah, we're going to look at that thread because it's interesting. But it goes along these same lines. It's an NBC journalist, and it just goes along with what you're thinking. I always worry when I do these articles and it kind of matches up with what people's concerns are about these outlets. It's like, well, so this is going to feed directly into what you already think about these things. And I'm sorry about that. I like critical analysis here, but sometimes they just do what they say on the tin, right? Sometimes whatever your existing biases are shown out there in the real world. But I'm going to continue with this, Alita. Do you want me to exit you out, or are you going to hang out with me a little bit?
I can hang out for a little bit.
All right. But while people who consume their news from content creators often believe it to be more trustworthy than mainstream media, creators aren't beholden to any editorial standards or journalistic norms, like referencing when you edit articles. Kat Tenbarge, a reporter at NBC News covering the trial, tweeted, in fact, they're incentivized to break them to fit the narrative and make money. I don't actually think that's fundamentally flawed, but we'll talk about it more in just a second. Media and influencers on the political right seized upon the cultural moment to make Depp a cause célèbre, using their coverage to turn the trial into a referendum on Me Too. Probably also accurate, but you see the problem with generalization. When you create this article that says everybody's weirdos, we're not going to talk about what their credentials are, look at all these weirdos, and then you say we're covering things more seriously, these weirdos are covering them without standards, no editorial standards or journalistic norms, and by the way, did we mention the right yet? No, now we're going to do that here. You get this entire framework of, honestly, Marilyn Manson popping up at any corner. It's boogeyman all the way down. And let's take a look at that Twitter thread to talk about it more.
Yeah, this idea that social media influencers are not held to certain standards. I mean, I don't necessarily inherently disagree with that. However,
right, they're not.
Social media influencers will be very quickly called out by people if they get their facts wrong, especially in a case like this. I remember when I first kind of dabbled into this subject, and I had just kind of started to cover because I got wind of the case, and I hadn't done as much background checking as I should have, and so I got some facts wrong.
Sure.
And I had people in the comments that were like, "You need to know more," and they're like, "You need to get more." And so I was like, "Okay." So like I went back and I researched everything, and I just kind of came to it with this idea of like, okay, I will be learning through live streams by talking to people that are very well versed in this. So, and that way it's very apparent where I'm coming from. It's very apparent. You can tell the words that I'm saying. I'm not coming at this as an authority source, but rather as somebody who has a certain background and is going to analyze things in a certain way.
Yep.
And just wants to learn more. So
yeah,
it's this idea that it's just the Wild West out there on social media is also not exactly accurate either.
No, it's not. It's not. And you get, as you say, you get real-time responses, right? We operate differently, period. So if you get something wrong, chat's going to tell you about it, and chat's not going to tell you about it with editorial norms either. You're going to hear about it in very strongly worded messages in general. And you get that real-time feedback. Yes, that can be contoured in bad directions. YouTube can do various things. There's good analysis there around the edges of social media running things in directions that maybe it shouldn't because the robots are just robots. But throwing all that out because it's a new way to present the news is wrong. Now we can see there's a reason why, the masthead legacy media of the world are not thrilled with it. We don't have the production cost that they've taken on. We don't have the overhead that they've taken on. And to some extent, people enjoy hearing from, if not neutral sources that are at least available to a judge on terms of biases or tilts or whatever else you want to describe. And hopefully when we're doing it right, talking about that with you, right? I had no problem reading the Washington Post article and say, look, I'm about to talk about a paragraph about a friend. Okay. So value my input on this as you would. Discount it practically, honestly, because I hate seeing Alita treated this way in an article like this. But if it weren't you, I feel confident that I would have said the same thing about, an edit that was otherwise unmarked. And that kind of Twitter stuff happening that says that I was never contacted, because honestly, it's an admission after you remove that sentence and you see those tweets from you. So that's fine. But yeah, I feel like I would have done the same, but I don't have to say that my viewers would feel the same. Honestly, I feel very ethically bound when I talk about these things on all these basically premise, because we are lawyers and we have a code of professional conduct. But does Kat Tenbarge? Well, she has thoughts. For people who have been studying the misinformation campaign around the Depp-Heard trial, this verdict is chilling. Oh yes, folks, we're going on a journey with Kat here. And understand that this is a paragraph that is one of the central premises in the Washington Post article that we were reading. The
so when she says misinformation campaign, is she referring to social media influencers, or is she referring to the mainstream media? Because there's been a lot of disinformation in mainstream media.
Alita is awake this morning, folks. Yeah, no, I don't know. I actually, one of my responses to this was something of a similar ilk. We'll get to that tweet in just a second. Okay. But yes, it's her premise, obviously, to arrive at the verdict is chilling, is that social media took over, was run by Depp Squad, and that's why, looking at this, they got it wrong, I guess. I mean, you still have to believe Amber Heard. I really wasn't very much online for justice for Johnny or anything like that. I just sat and watched the trial. Like, I didn't have outside extraneous influences in this car, and I'm not the final arbiter of truth. But I will say I am an example of someone that can just watch the thing and say, oh, yeah, I don't believe her version of the world more than Johnny's. The success of Depp's redemption arc narrative reveals a lot about our social media platforms and ourselves. Okay, a thread of things I learned during the Depp v. Heard. Media literacy around this trial was abhorrent. Most people, even if they say they did not watch the trial. They watched TikToks and YouTube videos, most of which were biased for a clear economic purpose. That's not the same thing. And this is kind of why I think Taylor Lorenz saw this Twitter thread and wrote an article about it. This is going to follow along the same lines, but I don't want to speculation. It matches up very well. But I wound up tweeting about this saying, I agree media literacy around this trial was abhorrent, but basically not in the way that you think. I think that the media showed itself for not being literate in the facts at hand or how to talk about them with their viewers. And that's why you had this big flight from lack of quality, realistically. That said, as I said earlier in this particular video, I'm willing to grant that most people didn't sit with us for, I don't even want to add up the hours we were on, Alita, for however long that was, very, very long time, and found their information otherwise. Now, they might have found it through recap videos on the wonderful Legal Bites channel that she did every day. I don't understand how, because I think I was sleeping by that point in time. And did follow it in not every minute of the court case. And I'm sure that there were folks that got biased information. But that doesn't make it this kind of zeitgeist horrible thing that happened because so many people, millions of people, were watching Law and Copyright. We're watching Emily. We're watching Nick. We're watching Legal Bites, whatever it is, and getting their information direct. Now, what economic purpose, you might have just asked? Well, follow the money. Most of the viral content around the trial fell into a dichotomy of Johnny good, Amber bad. As long as your content fit that narrative, it could increase your views, audience, and earnings. And this is probably true from what I saw in terms of the responses. So this point is at least well taken. But again, it assumes that that's everything and everywhere what was happening online in all corners. Posting from a pro-Amber or even a neutral position means you will lose followers. I will note I did not lose followers for coming in and saying I thought Johnny Depp had no case. There's no incentive to consider both sides. As a result, Amber's evidence has been largely ignored. Again, I think, Alita, you said this. The premise from Kat, the premise from Taylor, the premise from the Washington Post and other articles we've read is this notion that the only thing that one can ever care about is money. And I didn't come onto your platform and we didn't try to present, legal analysis because we thought that was the most effective way to make money on this thing. Right. We did it because that was our background and we thought that it would be useful to folks getting good information.
Yeah. And also that tweet saying that if you post even from a neutral position that you'll lose followers, my channel is an exact, is proof of the exact opposite. Because of the fact that my channel grew several times over. Well, I mean, even though I was very clear that I had basically decided that I was pro Johnny, I had a bunch of people on, you included, that were entirely neutral. And so our coverage was pretty much neutral because of the fact that we would go back and forth, we would argue, we would, and like we wouldn't have agreements that made our coverage explicitly pro Johnny Depp, right? Like we would say things that Amber Heard's team was doing right.
Yeah.
So I would consider the coverage from my channel to be neutral.
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem with neutral here, right, is, I would argue that, the Legal Bites platform slid into, Johnny should win this case towards the end of it, but that's after evaluation of the evidence, right? Like, you don't have to be neutral at that point. I was neutral throughout, realistically, until cross of Amber Heard. And then I said, okay, well, I can tell you who I think has the better end of this case, and that wasn't changed in the rest of the weeks that we covered it. So, that's not technically neutral at that point in time, I suppose, but it's open to being convinced the other direction, and it's open to evaluating the things that are presented. And I think that's the neutrality that you should try to achieve, not the elimination of all perspectives and analysis that you'd otherwise be doing.
Right.
And I think that that's definitely not what NBC News, I think, is she NBC News? Yeah,
I think so.
That's definitely not what NBC News or the Washington Post or anything else does either. So this is holding content creators up to standards that they themselves don't hold, in an effort to tar them with an economic brush that the mainstream content creators, we'll just call everybody content creators at NBC News or the Washington Post, definitely do hold. Their jobs don't exist if they don't bring in viewers. Their mastheads don't exist if they don't find subscribers to their newspaper. And so this is just kind of, she's making some good points about how the platforms can move things around, and I want to grant that, but it's from a perspective that is at best disingenuous. It's kind of missing some of the more specific context that you need to evaluate these things. Mm-hmm. Many people who consume this trial don't even know that Amber has evidence, or that a UK judge ruled in her favor for 12 out of 14 incidents of abuse she testified to with evidence. Many people don't know that Amber has evidence. I mean, we know she presented things for 3 weeks.
She had mountains of evidence.
Well, we know that she claims mountains of evidence, but we know that she presented a case. As Adam Waldman testified in this trial, YouTubers and social media played an overwhelming role in the perception of this trial. People who consume their news from content creators, specifically news around this case, believe it is more trustworthy than mainstream media. I think that's probably true, but I'd love to see a source on that. I don't know that we got a poll or anything like that. And then we've got a Michael Hobbs reference here. They say most articles about it, the trial, tend to focus on reactions to the trial rather than analysis of the actual evidence. That's true, but that's not my fault. You guys can analyze the evidence whenever you like. I think you'd find it a little bit harder to make the articles that you want to make here. And that a pitfall of going to YouTubers and TikTokers for coverage is that these creators aren't beholden to any editorial standards or journalistic norms. We saw this quoted in the Washington Post article. In fact, they're incentivized to break them to fit the narrative and make money. To which I can only say, obviously, you're incentivized to fit your narrative and make money. And your editorial standards or journalistic norms are what? Are you beholden to them? You have an editor, you have an ombudsman. You take things out of articles if you're the Washington Post and you don't mention that you did. You make revisions that you don't tell us about when called out on Twitter by these content creators. I feel beholden to the same kind of ethical standards that I would as a lawyer when I talk about these things. You'll hear a lot of what you might call lawyer words when I say things. I say I have a lot of probablys and almost certainlys. I always avoid the hundreds and zeros for the most part. But I don't see a board that is out there kicking journalists' butt for editorial standard breaking or journalistic norm breaking. A norm, by the way, isn't a rule anyway. So you get to this point in time when you're looking at this kind of thing and you say, all right, yes, you want to hold people to other standards that you don't hold yourself, at least as a group. And that's generalizing. And it's not contextually sound as an argument. We've known for a while that social media incentivizes bad behavior because it fuels engagement. Engagement's good. It also incentivizes conspiracy theories, groupthink, cruelty, and harassment. And this case exemplifies all of that. We have seen conspiracy theories. We have seen some groupthink. We have seen some cruelty. And we have seen harassment. I don't know whether or not that is something that is unique to the social media landscape. I will tell you that there are those out there, including, I think, my friend Alita, myself, and others, that go out there with a mission statement to, make social media better, yeah. to make the news get out there better, and really hold ourselves to that, and try to curate our commentary, chat, whatever else it might be, to have that conversation. I mean, God, reasonable minds can differ continues to be my motto on this channel. And that's the opposite of everything that is said here. And then we get to the fun stuff. Many of the criticisms of Amber Heard are rooted in misogyny. Okay. But beyond that, they're also rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of how trauma and abuse work. When people cherry pick from Amber's testimony, hyperfixate on her emotions and body language, lie about her, and make fun of her, they feed into this culture that hurts all victims, even if Amber isn't a victim. This behavior hurts victims.
Oh, that's not a good line.
How about them apples? This thread isn't going to be popular. I can't imagine why, Kat. because reporting on this case fairly is really unpopular. I'm pretty sure reporting on the case fairly is very popular.
That's not why this thread isn't going to be popular.
So no, it's not. When I first started talking about it, I realized that I couldn't share anything neutral without attracting hate or losing followers. So I had to stop caring, or you had to not care about your followers if you really feel called to say something separately differently, right? You're not beholden to making sure you keep your follower number up. In fact, I have a great deal of respect for those that go out there with their statements and don't care about what the follower number is or the subscription or the super chats or anything else. Isn't that what you just accused content creators of not doing? And yet you're here in a thread saying, I couldn't say anything because my followers would go down. Okay, who's chasing clout now? Unfortunately, social media incentivizes us to care very, very much about what other people think of us. This has a net negative effect on social progress because progress is rarely popular in the moment. And this is projection, right? So you don't have to care about the like button. You don't have to care about the down like button. I tell people, hey, if you don't like this content, put that down vote down. And yes, the platform loves down votes, so go nuts. But I'm always interested. It does. The platform.
It's why like real content creators don't actually care about the percentage of upvote versus downvote because it's engagement nonetheless.
It's engagement, and like YouTube, like, ooh, is there a little controversy there? The robots love it. It's like catnip.
Yeah.
So it's just, you see this so often, and I'm not trying to call out Cat 10 Barge because I have no idea who this is. You're welcome to come on here if you like, but it is the opposite of what she's saying while she says it. She's saying content creators are motivated by this, and I don't want to say these things because I lose followers, and I'm on NBC News and I'm a tech reporter, and everything is wrong regardless of whether Amber Heard is a victim or not. But she's clearly a victim because the disinformation campaign, I mean, it's just all over the place. And yet you can see the likes, you can see the retweets on this, that people are sharing this, right? As many people have pointed out, there will likely be a future redemption arc for Amber Heard like there was for Britney Spears. I realized I couldn't wait for that. I wanted to be on the right side of history today. End thread. I am on tape a number of times saying, I hope Amber Heard gets the help that she needs, that she shows the contrition that she should for what appear to be gross exaggerations, if not outright lies, and that I have no problem with her landing on her feet sometime in the future if those things happen. I have no problem with that at all. That's a redemption arc. Some other people disagree with me, but I have absolutely no problem with that. And yet you put everybody in this bucket, and you don't talk about the biggest group of people that are actually putting this online content out, which isn't me necessarily, but it is lawyers in general. And this is the premise for the article that we're reading right now. This is why I made this article the headline for today, because, you know, I'm egotistical, and this is talking about my friends. I think that's pretty cool in the Washington Post. That they do it poorly is just icing on the top, right? But yeah, that's the thread that you missed out on big portions of. You feel like you missed out? You feel like you're more educated now?
Educated? Well, educated as to someone's perception.
And then I think we're mostly going to circle the drain here and continue with this to the end. As more people turn to online creators for information, misinformation flourishes.
Because we never get that from the MSM.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's people all the way down. I wish we could have this conversation on a more neutral playing field, right? They fear for their subscribers, and I don't blame them. But like, you're human beings. You make mistakes all the time, including in this article we're reading right now. And that's the Waldman statements at minimum. It's the removal of parentheticals at maximum, right? And the trial could provide a playbook for anyone looking to leverage the creator economy for their own gain. So they're afraid of Johnny Depp and Adam Waldman. Joe Federer, author of the book The Hidden Psychology of Social Networks, said that it's easy to see how manipulating a TikTok algorithm or planting the right information with the right influencers causes a real misunderstanding of important issues. There's a huge difference between breaking a story and articulating an informed point of view on it and following on to a trending topic. This is delightful, right? Because this is marketing for us. Articulating an informed point of view on things is what we do. Check out Legal Bites, like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe to Hoeg Law.
Yeah,
if you haven't done so already. If you're watching and you haven't done so already.
It's fine. It's fine. but,
like, what are you doing here if you haven't?
We articulate informed points of view, right? And that's why it's so interesting that you don't get that reference, Alita, as a lawyer. It blows up half of this stuff if they just call you Legal Bites up top.
Yep.
The popularity of the trial online has only emboldened influencers to lean harder into breaking news and compete more directly with traditional news organizations on coverage. And again, I don't think you've made your argument. I don't think linking to a cat thread actually gets you to where you want to be. So anybody that isn't already on your side of the fence by now looks at a sentence like this, if you're writing it in the Washington Post, and says, I don't see the issue. I don't see the issue with people going out there and otherwise reporting directly to me. I have eyes. I have ears. I can evaluate whether I think they're a goofball or whether I think they are articulating an informed point of view. I can judge those things for myself. I don't need you to gatekeep for me. I don't need the Washington Post to tell me what's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
By Thursday morning, less than 24 hours after the verdict came down, many creators were already in search of the next big story. Oh, we're just vultures, aren't we? Marlon McLeod, 20, a content creator who runs a large Instagram account with 3 million followers dedicated to posting videos of attractive men, said he plans to pivot his page to covering more news. A video he posted recently about the trial got more than 34 million views. Good for you, attractive men poster guy. I do want to cover more news and big things happening in the world, he said. Before the trial, my account was about posting random videos of men, to each their own. But as my account grows, I want to be diving more into these events, reporting on them, kind of like news outlets. Now, I joked about this.
Is that so bad though, to say that somebody wants to go from covering from content that is maybe a little bit more shallow to something that is a little bit more important and a little bit more in depth? Is that so bad?
But he's not press, right? He doesn't have an editor telling him when he's not allowed to remove things without notation in an article. He's just out there talking about stuff as a human being. And you can see even in this, in terms of the way this is structured, I think this is the very end. Yes, it's been clarified for Waldman's testimony. You can see even in this structure exactly what was written here, right? This ends, and I make the joke because the joke is right there. That's why they put it up this way. Is that this is a guy posting men videos saying he wants to cover news. It ends as it began. Look at these goofballs that are trying to do what we're doing, right? Look at these idiots. They're vultures. They were already in search of the next big story. They're just out there for the clicks, the monsters that they are. They'll do anything for those clicks.
How is that different than the mainstream media?
Yeah. Well, and he makes videos of attractive men, and then he's going to change to talking about other things. And how dare he, essentially, is the premise after you've read this whole article, after you've gotten through that Twitter thread that we talked about 4 paragraphs before. They don't care about articulating an informed view. They're just following on to a trending topic. The premise here is not remotely like what Taylor Lorenz says it is, right? When we get to her tweeting at me, it is describing a different article than what this actually is, right? I hope my piece illuminated why people are turning to content creators. No, it's about content creators and why they're turning to specific coverage. This article is not about why people seek them out. It isn't. And why people trust influencers over traditional media. No, it isn't. You have a line in there about authenticity, which is true, but it's a line.
The why is definitely not anywhere in that article. There's absolutely nothing even remotely trying to explain why people trust influencers over traditional media. Not a single line.
Well, and the truth of it is, it's actually a great example, right? This looks to me like an influencer talking to me, right? This is Taylor Lorenz. I don't know her from Adam, but looking at this is how an influencer would talk to you to try to get you to think about what they said in a very specific way, which is ironic because this is an article about how content creators talk to people in a manipulative way or follow the platform or search for the clicks and the clout and the money. And this just isn't an accurate description of what we all just read. But it's designed, you got, the thank you so much for discussing my story, right? And, I wasn't mean or anything, but I said, well, fine, let's talk about seriousness in media, shall we? And, it's certainly indicative of what direction that this particular conversation is going to go. And then, you get the very nice, the overly nice, thank you so much. Feel free to reach out. I hope my piece illuminated all of this stuff. And it's like, Ms. Lorenz, I'm happy to have you on to converse with these things. But at this point in time, I don't trust you to have this conversation in this space, without real-time kind of communication, because this isn't accurate. It isn't accurate what you described when you originally wrote it. It isn't accurate when you revised it without telling people. And the overall thrust of your article isn't accurate for the online society or news coverage that I am seeing in real time. So no, I'm not going to DM you. So, come on, we could talk about it. And that's, maybe it's projection all the way down. I mean, maybe that's the way she interacts with people. And then you say, oh, content creators are only after this for money and clicks and clout, because I think that comes out a little bit in that cat thread. I think it does. Yeah. By the time she's saying, I can't say these things because I'd lose followers, I'd be like, well, I mean, you have those ethical standards, right? So you have principles about what truth is and whether or not you saying something out into the wild is either truthful or omitting what you think the actual truth is. So surely you're not just contouring your messaging to keep followers. That wouldn't be ethical. And then you have these tweets like this from Ms. Lorenz, and you say, okay, so you all are influencers and maybe we're not. And maybe the shoes are flipping around a little bit in a weird way. But that's the first article. I don't know if we're going to do a second article or not, but that's the first article I wanted to discuss with you all today. Alita, any final thoughts on Ms. Lorenz's coverage of people covering other things and moving on to covering yet more things?
Yeah, I look forward to the correction article that talks about how folks like LawTube are becoming a thing because we are using our area of expertise and our experiences and our knowledge, our professional knowledge, to help educate the masses and to help curb misinformation put out there by others, including mainstream media. I look forward to that article coming from Ms. Lorenz. I don't expect to see it, but I look forward to it.
I think there's an audience there for it. I think she could find some people that would be interested in reading that. I mean, I think that there are millions of people that were interested in watching it from y'all. So I think that honestly, I think the first journalistic outlet that actually pivots into treating it like it's a serious thing would actually find some good clicks there.
Yeah, I think so.
But what do I know, right? I'm not mainstream media. I'm just a guy out there making videos.
We're just lawyers living in small boxes on your screen.
We are, or in your phone. You don't know. We could live in your phone, other electronic devices.